A safari trip in Egypt is not just about riding vehicles across the desert, but it's about visiting the oases of Egypt and getting to know their culture and traditions. There are similarities between the 4 main oases of Egypt, but only one stands out and differs from any other place in the Nile Valley. It's the unique oasis of Siwa. El Jari mountain is a cemetery or the burial place of Khamisa village in Siwa oasis during the Greek-Roman period. Some tombs were cut out in the rocks at the foot of the mountain, but most of them are cut out in the middle of the mountain. There are 184 tombs here, and they're all facing south, and they remind us of the tombs of the Roman district. One of the most important monumental sites in Siwa are those which lie north and west to Lake Siwa, which stretches to El Maraki area. These sites could be identified due to the relation between each water spring and the village next to it. They are the old wells and the old villages called Hataya. These monuments are usually composed of a collection of tombs, in addition to some foundations of buildings and sometimes small temples. The lands in western Siwa are distinguished with their height above the level of the water surface. That's why we find the cultivations that were cultivated in the past in them were seeds like wheat and barley, in addition to the olive trees and the palms. To the contrary are the lands in eastern Siwa, like Ati and Quraishit and Abu Sharuf and others, where the percentage of water salinity is high and the level of surface water is also high. El Jari mountain is the one below which lies the village of El Jari. It was used during the Greek-Roman period as a cemetery, where some tombs were dug in the lower foot of the mountain, and most of the tombs were cut out in the upper half of the height of the mountain. There are about 184 tombs here, and most of them lie on the southern side of the mountain. This place is considered the main cemetery of Khamisa area and its surroundings. A monumental quarry has been recently found at the foot of the mountain opposite to El Jari spring. The stones cut out of that quarry were used to build the houses and the old buildings around the water wells of the Heba and El Jari and Karshun. In the quarry of El Jari mountain, some graffiti of the old Libyan language, the Amazighian, were found. This proves that during the use of that quarry during the Roman period, that was the language used by the workers. It's also noticed that the northern side of the quarry was used by cutting out tombs in it, which means that the tombs were dug in a later period. The foundations of a small temple were found in one of the newly reclaimed gardens. Bilad al-Rum means the Roman district. In the past, it was an area full of life, with water springs and villages like Meshandat and Khamisa. But they were all gone for two reasons. The first is the reclamation of land. The second is that all these houses were built of raw materials that can easily be dissolved by water. What remains today are the rock tombs and the remaining of a Roman fortress. The area of Bilad al-Rum, which means the Romans' lands, lie 4 kilometers west to the Heba and almost 20 kilometers from Siwa. It's situated opposite to Khamisa Spring and Meshandet Spring and their old villages. There are supposed to be villages and houses around that area, but unfortunately, none of the houses remained for 2 reasons. The first is the reclamation of land since ancient times and continuously, and the second reason is that most of the houses were built of mud bricks and rubble and trunks of and olives, and their existence close to the level of the surface water led to their demolition. In his book about Siwa, Dr. Fakhri has pointed out that this place could be a Byzantine church based on a text written in the manuscript of Siwa, which mentions that there was a group of Christians or Romans living in that place, and that's the reason behind the name of this area. The temple existed at least until 1869, when it was visited by Rolfs. Caio has described it in details, saying that it's one of the most beautiful monuments he's seen in the oasis. It's the same Dorian temple mentioned by the early travelers. Its dimensions are 28 meters length from south to north and 7.5 meters breadth from east to west, with a height of 5 meters and thickness of walls reaching 80 centimeters. The entrance of Bilad al-Rum temple faced south and is composed of 3 halls following the Dorian style. In front of the halls was a colonnade 34 meters tall. These entrances were adorned with reliefs, but no texts were carved on the walls. The temple dates back to the 1st century AD and not to the Roman period. Dr. Fakhri also thinks that this place could be a Roman fortress, but new excavations done between 1997 and 2000 proved beyond doubt that most of the tombs adjacent to the temple or the fortress were dug according to the Greek-Roman tombs, and that its constructional elements go back to the Roman period in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, and are similar to the Dorian temple close by, which dates back to the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd century AD. The tombs of Bilad al-Rum lie adjacent to a building thought to be a Dorian temple or a Byzantine church. They were cut out in the northern chain of mountains by the western and southern foot of Bilad al-Rum mountain. They were cut out by the end of the 1st century AD and the beginning of the 2nd century. They could have been reused in a much later period, most probably in the 5th century AD by some monks or Christians traveling or escaping from the Roman persecution. The tombs of Bilad al-Rum are cut out on 3 levels. The upper level lies in the middle of the mountain, and all its tombs are cut out in the rock. As for the middle and bottom levels, they are mainly composed of a room or 2 or 3. The burial chamber is internal, and the front chamber was dug according to the Greek-Roman tombs, composing of an eros and a prostus. Usually, in this group of tombs, The inner room is cut out in the rocks, and the outer room is built with rubble until the middle of the height of the walls. Then the rest is continued by mud bricks. They have a vaulted ceiling, and usually their entrances face the south. The southern wall was always built with leveled blocks of stone, and on the two sides of the walls, from outside, there are bases of pedestal columns, built or cut out according to the Dorian or Ionian style. At the front of the tomb, there are usually 2 or 4 columns to give the impression of the Greek temple style. The tombs of this level were buried with sand that reached almost 5 meters high. The tombs of the Roman district are composed each of 1 or 2 or 3 chambers cut in the rocks, and a front chamber acting as a reception equal to the Roman tombs, the Eccos and Prestos. Well, this front part or the front reception is usually built at the bottom part with rubble and sand and the upper part with mud bricks. The entrance of these tombs usually face south. A tomb is composed of an internal burial chamber cut out in the rocks with a ceiling that goes up to 1.5 meters. As for the front chamber, it was built by partial stones, irregular in shape, in addition to mud bricks, except for the sides of the entrance, which lie in the southwest corner. Even blocks of limestone were used in its building. The front chamber wasn't basically prepared for burials, but some of these chambers were used in later periods to bury members of the family. So there are diggings in the tiled floors of some chambers. These pits were 50 centimeters deep in the ground, and in some of them skeletons were found. The bodies were buried on their backs, facing upwards, with heads facing west and feet facing east, and both arms placed on the sides or by the pelvis, but sometimes the directions are reversed. It's noticed that some bodies were buried, then covered with a separating layer of sand, then other bodies were placed above them. Some masks were found over the faces of the bodies, and it's the first time these masks appear in Siwa. The material of which the masks were made is wax and resin. It seems that the method of making these masks was by pouring the liquid wax on the face of the deceased and let it to dry out. That's because pieces of cloth were found on each ear, nose and eye opening, which means that the one who was making the mask was very careful not to let any of these liquefied substances to enter the body. After the pouring, a careful operation of drawing and specifying the face details was made, showing the eyebrows and the eyelashes carefully. As for the hair, it was arranged according to the deceased hairstyle or the fashion of the time. Sometimes, white or colored glass was placed over the eye of the deceased from within. These masks are very similar to the masks or the portraits of El Fayoum. In the outer chamber of the tomb, some pottery vessels were found and are composed of either a lantern or a liquid-keeping vessels. Offering tables are also found. Some were stable and fixated to the ground, and they are basically composed of a square stone with a basin underneath. As for the second, it's movable and could be placed anywhere in the tomb. Originally, The opening table was placed in front of the false door, as according to the ancient Egyptian creed, it's where the family of the deceased place their offerings of fresh food and drinks to the double or the Ka of the deceased, which lives inside the tomb. The Ka is free to get in and out of the tomb through the false door. The middle level of the tombs of the land of the Romans, monumental area, is composed of 5 tombs that are almost similar to the ground level of tombs. They are distinguished by the existence of bases in front of each tomb. There are 2 or 4 bases of columns that had the Dorian style. Beside these bases, 4 capitals of columns were found, 2 of the Ionian style and 2 of the Dorian style. The first tomb is quite interesting, as it's composed of 3 internal chambers and the outer 2 built of mud bricks, with wells covered with plaster as well as the floor. Lintels are found on both sides of the entrance, and they were used for putting oil lamps or flares inside. Sarcophagi were found, composed of stone slabs that were cut out in the form of a sarcophagus. Plaster was used to join between them. The length of each of the sarcophagi is 2 meters, with a breadth of 60 centimeters by 50 centimeters high. Each sarcophagus contained a body or 2, with a layer of sand separating between them. Just skeletons and cloth were found inside, but above each coffin, at its southern end above the head, a gravestone was found. The first tombstone comprised 8 Greek lines. It starts at the top with a sunk relief of 2 palm reeds opposite each other. That was followed by geometrical design composed of dots and squares. The sides of the pallet is decorated with 3 equal lines in a geometrical form. The bottom of the stone is missing. The Greek lines say, "Farewell to the spirit of Eulogius and his mother, servants of Jesus Christ, 60 years old. Lord, save their soul." The second tombstone is 45 by 23 centimeters. Its middle is sunk relieved in Greek and colored in red. It has 8 lines and is a part of a cornice or lintel and was reused later. It says, "Here lies the body Hemela. She died 28 years old." In conclusion, the architectural style of Bilad al-Rum tombs shows a mix of several styles, including the bases of columns and Dorian and Ionian and composite capitals, and also in using stones or cutting out the internal chambers and finishing up the tombs by using mud bricks. Most of the tombs are composed of 2 chambers. The front ones are always vaulted with mud bricks. The facades of the tombs take the shape of miniature of Greek-Roman temples. As for the method of burials, the body of the deceased had to be placed in a side pit called locally, which is a cell. Another form is to build a mastaba or a stone above the floor in one of the corners of the room and place the body of the deceased in it. It's noticed that the position of the bodies didn't take a special direction at the burial, but they all had to be placed on the back with the head facing upwards. Some bodies were well mummified and covered with a layer of cartonnage and colored and gilded, while some other is badly mummified, and the rest are just skeletons. Some of the stones of the sarcophagi found in these tombs were taken from earlier buildings and reused, like the bases and capitals of columns and the floor tiles. Also, the burials in the tiled floors prove that these burials inside the stone coffins and in the pits were placed later and didn't belong to the original date of the tombs. These tombs date to the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, which is the age of Emperor Trajan. As for the architectural elements used in both sides, they have the same pattern and have similar styles. The surrounding area was used as a quarry, and studies show that a massive amount of stones was extracted from it. These stones are of the best quality, and this proves that the stones used in building some of Amun's temple in the Oasis were cut out in Dakrul mountain and here, in the spectacular monumental area of Bilad al-Rum.